Chris, welcome back. Next case, I'm loving the series. So I've got a red eye, right? Patient calls in and our clinic chart shows up, they scheduled as a red eye, right? And same day, we like to call it an emergency. We can argue over whether red eyes are truly emergencies or not, but we get them in because we care for patients. So typical red eye, right? It ultimately is going to end up being a viral conjunctivitis, right? You've got some hyperemia, you've got a watery eye. We're going to suspect that maybe there's some bacterial because they're a teacher in school and they're around, nasty little second graders all day long. So we're going to write them a prescription for a combo drop because we want some antibiotic, but some steroid as well, maybe some hypochlorous acid, some pure and clean. I'm going to bring them back in 3 days just to make sure that things are looking a whole lot better. How are you managing this and billing this case?
Can I ask one follow-up question?
Please.
Did that patient have any other, like, were they have a fever? Did they have any other systemic symptoms outside of just the red eye? Cold, didn't feel well, malaise, headache.
Let's say no to start, and let's come back and say yes.
Fair enough. All right. So in my mind, I would think about that as an acute uncomplicated illness or injury based on the AMA's definition. That would be a low type of problem or a level 3 type of problem. And then you prescribe a medication, which is a moderate intervention. That would be a level 3, right? We have to have 2 of the 3 rows underneath one of those columns in order to hit that column. Again, if you're thinking about a grid, we've got those on iCode Education. If you're thinking about a grid, basically, you're thinking low type of problem, moderate intervention. That's a level 3. That's how I would think about that. Then you said, well, let's play this out, because you said, well, we'll see them back in 3 days. Okay, so 3 days. Let's say they're doing well. Do you want to tell me, are they doing better?
Yeah, they're doing better.
Okay. So basically it's run a typical course, a definitive and prescribed course. And when you see that patient back, now it's a mild, uncomplicated illness. And so what happens is that condition went from an acute uncomplicated illness to something that is resolving with what your expectations are. And so because of that, and because it's not chronic, then it falls into a different category on that follow-up, which is a low or a minimal type of problem, which is a level 2 type of problem. And so if you just say, okay, well, I want you to finish out the medication that we prescribed, you're going to continue that medication, which is a level 4 type of risk, right? You're going to continue the medication, level 4 risk, but you're limited because you have that minimal problem because it's resolving and you didn't have any other chronicity to it. Now that would be a level 2 on your follow-up.
So, perfect. So let's go back and say that, because you asked about systemic associations. Yeah, they were feeling, they were feeling crummy, maybe had a low-grade fever, which, by the way, do you measure temperature in the office?
Not anymore, but I saw a chart recently from a patient that I hadn't seen in 4 years. And we were still measuring temperatures on those patients, but no, I don't routinely.
Okay. But they say they're feeling crummy. They say they have a low grade, had a low grade fever. So same red eye presentation. How do you walk through this?
Yeah, it's an acute illness. So again, AMA definition actually talks about this. They say an acute illness with systemic symptoms is now a moderate type of problem. So we don't, what's important about this, Aaron, and so obviously it's important because yes, okay, we go from a level 3 now to a level 4 because we have the same intervention. So moderate problem, moderate risk, now we're a level 4. But what's important to me about this is it comes back to review of systems. And when we're trained in school, we sort of have this sheet that we just have to check boxes off of, and I'm not saying that's not important. I think it's important, but the reason it's important is because it shows when we're identifying, when we understand how to define our types of problems that we're seeing, we start to see that it is important that we would ask a patient with a red eye if they have a fever, if they've had a cold, if they've got other systemic symptoms, that becomes important, and not just from a standpoint of caring for the patient. That's why it's really important, but it also underlies the value of what you're doing. So when just by documenting, patient reports a low grade fever, or patient reports they don't feel very well, in your history, now all of a sudden that is a different type of problem, and it comes with additional value on your payment and your fees for managing that patient.
Yeah. Well, you're managing a bigger, more complex case.
Correct.
It's not just limited to the eyes. Now you're dealing with other systems in play.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Now I bring that patient back, right? So the same patient in 3 days, they say their fever's gone. The red eye is clearing up. It's healing as you would expect, right? How would you manage that?
That would probably wind up with the same way as the patient that didn't have the fever. They had a limited or minor problem, a self-limited or minor problem that was following a definitive and prescribed course, and then we would still, let's say we carried out the medication, then our risk is still going to be a level 4 type of risk, but our problem is still going to be a level 2 type of problem. So the patient then would still be a level 2 on that follow-up visit.
The Myopia Collective. CooperVision and the AOA have partnered in a groundbreaking initiative to change the way optometrists in the U.S. treat children with myopia. The purpose of the Myopia Collective is to rally the profession of optometry and its allies to interrupt the status quo and elevate the new standard of care for children with myopia. Every individual is encouraged to become a member of the collective. By joining, you commit to taking action to help slow the progression of myopia in children. You'll receive updates and information about the collective and its work in the fight against myopia, gain access to educational opportunities and resources offered by the collective, and hear from change agents, the ambassador optometrists selected to serve as advocates for community and policy change that facilitates the mission of the collective. Scan the QR code or click on the link in the show notes to join the collective today. In the past, our focus revolved around prescribing MacuHealth or MacuHealth Plus to patients at risk of macular degeneration, while also recommending it to collegiate and professional athletes for enhanced contrast sensitivity in sports performance. However, this year's introduction of the Life Meter has been a game changer. The Life Meter revealed a concerning truth. Many of my patients have alarmingly low skin carotenoid levels, indicating potential deficiencies in essential body tissues like the retina and brain. Supported by over 30 peer-reviewed publications, Life Meter's accuracy, consistency, and effectiveness has been demonstrated across 2,000 subjects with diverse backgrounds. With this newfound insight, I can now have meaningful conversations about carotenoid levels with all of my patients, even those who may seem outwardly healthy. To learn more about this empowering technology, feel free to contact your MacuHealth representative or click on the link in the show notes. Together, let's optimize patient care and elevate their well-being. Welcome to the Aaron Werner podcast on iCode Media. I've got two of my best friends in optometry with me and two of my mentors with me today, Mick Kling and Laurie Sorrenson, and the three of us have spent a time or two together virtually and lots more time, thankfully, as well in person. But these two geniuses and pillars in the optometric community have recently published a white paper on adding an associate doctor to your practice. And we've linked that in the show notes, but what I want to dive into is really pick their brain over the next 45 minutes or so, because if you don't know them, they've done it all. In fact, Laurie, I'm going to quote you, and that you're an expert because you've made more mistakes than everybody else, right?
It's made all the mistakes in a very narrow field.
In a very narrow field, yes. And I mean that in a good way, right? Not that that we shouldn't listen to you, but right, you've seen it all in between the two of you. I don't think there's a whole lot that hasn't been seen or helped or experienced, and you both just are so giving of your times to our colleagues and knowledge and helping them work through challenges as well. So if you haven't personally experienced it, you've probably helped somebody work through it. So I appreciate you both being on. And before we jump in, for those who don't know who you are, just real quick intro and just who you are, where you're at, all that kind of good stuff. So Laurie
Sorrenson, Austin, Texas. Have a 9-doctor single location practice. I've been teaching at the University of Houston College of Optometry practice management for over 20 years. Being the Vision Source administrator in the Austin area for over 20 years. Have been working with Aaron and Mick for the last 5-6 years on practice management type stuff for Vision Source doctors, which I have just truly loved so much.
That's fun. I was worried you were going to say it felt like it's been 20 years.
I should have said. That would have been something Mick would have said.
That would have been. All right. And Mick?
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Mick Kling, San Diego. I have a practice here in downtown San Diego. I don't see patients anymore. I'm full time as a practice transition advisor for Vision Source, and I help our members. We have 3,000 members in the network, and at any given moment, 1 to 2% of our membership is transitioning to ownership. So I just assist them in the transition process. But I also get to put together education with these two, and really something I absolutely love to do is put together new content and think about new ways to share knowledge with the OD community out there. So really appreciate the invitation and looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah. Awesome. Me too. And I think you both bring very unique perspectives, which is why I like talking to both of you. Before we hit record, I was kicking myself because we should have hit record the minute they came on. We were already knee deep into conversations. And it was interesting to me, the idea of looking at associate doctors, because we started working on this in the middle of COVID when it seemingly was, the rest of the world seemingly was trying not to lose their businesses. And the practices we were working with were looking at growing and expanding, right? And how can we when do I bring an associate in? How do I bring an associate in? What do these young kids want? What do these young kids need? What's attractive to them? And I naively thought, well, this is going to be an easy question to answer because associate's an associate. We quickly realized that that's not the case, right? And even in San Diego, Mick and I are both here. Associates are different. You start throwing in some rural locations and some rural practices, it's a whole wide variety. So, and I know you both get the question, hey, when should I bring in an associate? So I'm going to start by just throwing that on the table. When should I bring in an associate?
Well, I think Mick has like a more defined answer, and then I like to not negate it, but scooch it around a little bit. So I think Mick should answer it first.
Yeah. So, and I like that order because there is some flexibility in what I'm going to say. So, because I tend to be much more methodical about things and spreadsheetish, I think of things from a return on investment standpoint. So, one of the things that we've learned, and by the way, just to take a step back, Aaron, and kind of give your listeners some perspective, we have a course called the Business of Optometry, and a group of courses. And one of the courses that we have is on how to scale. Aaron, you and I were on a plane ride back to San Diego from Houston, and we were strategizing about topics. And one of them came out with this: why do practices get stuck at about $850,000 in revenue? And the answer is because most single doctor, single owners try to hold on to everything. And the way that practices break out above that is by investing in associate doctors and learning to and become comfortable delegating. And that includes clinical care. And so it really got us thinking about, like, how do practices scale? And so one thing that we realized is that the practices that really took it to the next level figured out how to bring in associate doctors. So that got me thinking of, like, when is the right time to do it? I unfortunately have occasionally calls with ODs that brought the associates in too quickly, and they've realized that they are just trading income. So in other words, their personal compensation has gone down because they had to bring in the associate doctor. So that's obviously a situation you don't want to be in. So very broadly, and I want to dig into this, but I'll just give you the broad idea. So when a practice hits about 800,000 in revenue, that means the single doctor's probably seeing patients about 4 days a week, pretty busy on those 4 days, and maybe doing a day of administrative work. And if you're booked out a week or two or more, you've got pent up demand, it's probably a good time to be thinking about bringing in an associate. Now, I like the idea of stepping in slowly. If you can bring somebody in a couple days a week to start, that's good. A lot of young ODs want full time or need full time work, so that creates a little bit of a challenge. So you have to just be sure you're thinking about your pent up demand and whether you can support bringing somebody in without affecting your own compensation, and yet making sure your practice is still able to afford to pay the associate's wage. So somewhere around 800, 900,000 in revenue, you're booked out a couple weeks. I start giving it some thought.
Yeah. Now, when you say that practice, they bring in an associate and they end up just trading salaries, do you find in that situation more often or not that the owner doctor was just liking the idea of bringing in an associate but wasn't willing to delegate? So they weren't letting go enough, or do you think they brought them in too soon?
I've seen both. I've seen where they brought the associate doctor in and there wasn't enough patient demand, so that the owner took a couple days off, plugged in the associate. So they say owner took 2 days off, but plugged in an associate 5 days. So now you have 3 incremental days of additional availability for patient care, and there wasn't enough patient demand to fill those books. That happens actually fairly consistently.
I
Um,
also I also think that when you're doing this, you've got to think about marketing. Like you've got to figure out a way to grow your practice and get more patients in there. That just doesn't happen overnight. I mean, it doesn't happen just because it does happen if you're booked out 3 or 4 weeks. You know, to me, that's such a no-brainer that it's going to work. But if you're 1 to 2 weeks booked out, maybe, or you're just tired and you want an extra day for admin, that kind of a thing, you need to put that time and effort into marketing. And of course, optometry marketing is not a science for sure. And but I have always spent, anytime I bring in an associate doctor, I've spent a lot of time and effort marketing that person to internally and externally, and trying to get them more booked.
Yeah,
think
and
it's more.
to add on to that, I've seen situations where the owner's booked out 3 months, the
Yep.
associate has availability tomorrow. It's because the team, the office, hasn't learned how to or done a good job of, for lack of a better word, selling the associate. And I know, Laura, you have some strategies because every time you bring in a new associate, you've got to fill their books up. So, you have to have a deliberate plan with your office team that everybody's in line to fill up the associate schedule. Otherwise, if they allow patients to say, "Oh, I'm just going to stay with Doctor So and So. He's been my doctor forever, or she's been my doctor forever," it really it's going to be hard to transition those folks over to a new associate.
Yeah, my first piece of advice for every owner doc is let the new doctor do an eye exam on everybody in the office, but especially the people who are answering the phones or answering the text messages that are making appointments. Make them their doctor now that they can say on the phone, well, you know, Doctor So and So has availability tomorrow. He's my doctor and he's amazing. I mean, that's just like, think about that for a second. Wouldn't that, you were calling your dentist, you couldn't get in for 3 weeks, but they said that to you, you'd go, oh, well, I'll give them a try, right? I mean, who wouldn't? I mean, I'm sure there's some out there that wouldn't, but I think that's huge, and that's the kind of training, coaching you have to do. But they need to become their doctor. That's my biggest tip to get especially if the owner doc's that booked out.
Yeah, I like that. Hardest part of that is the ego.
So that's the other thing. Probably my first tip is got to let go of your ego. If you're hiring an associate doctor, you want the patient to see the other associate doctor. You want the patient to see the practice.
Yes.
It's probably the bigger picture is they come to the practice, they don't come to the doctor. And we know that's not true all the time. We got patients that aren't going to buy into that, but that's what the goal should be.
Yeah.
And so one other thing I was going to bring up, when Mick was talking about these younger docs needing full time, right? Because they have their loans and all that. I always use, and let's say you're wanting to hire a part-time doctor. I always say, don't use the words part-time. Just tell the doctor that you have, the associate doctor you're trying to hire, you have 2 days available, you have 3 days available, you have 4 days available, whatever you want to start them with. Don't use the word part-time. There's an ego thing in there. Most of my doctors, matter of fact, I think none of them work over 4 days a week now. Most of them work 3.5. And I have a couple that work 2. She does consider herself 2.5. She kind of considers herself part-time, but we don't ever use those words. And then I have a couple that work 3 days a week, and they definitely consider themselves full-time. So just, it doesn't have to be 5 days a week, right? Just don't use that word.
And especially the young ones, I found that same thing. It's not part time, but here's what I have available for you, and then I encourage them to get experience elsewhere, especially when they're young. You know, go work in a different private practice. Go work in an ODMD clinic. Go work in even retail if you need to, and then bring some of that back to us. Like, what do you learn there that's cool? And while we're building up your 2 days, hopefully will become 3 days. Hopefully become 4. But now you're a much more well-rounded and experienced doctor, not just on seeing eyeballs, but flow and managing teams and managing people.
So what's interesting is I've only had one that ever increased their hours after I hired them. Yes. So I was like, well, I have 3 days or I have 3.5, and they figure out their work balance is really wonderful, and they're making enough money, and they'll do some fill in or this kind of thing, but they're not sitting there saying, I need another day, I need another day. They're not doing that.
Yeah, and I think it's great advice about how you frame it in the job description, because we had a associate position available in my office, and I took your advice and I was careful not to say full-time, part-time, but just say, in fact, I think we said anywhere from 2 to 5 days a week. So because we knew if we got somebody for 2, we could probably get somebody else for 3. So even though we had 5 days of availability, we were just being strategic about how we framed it in the offering. And so, because to your point, there are moms that want to practice part-time. There are some people that just want to work 4 days a week, and that's fine. I mean,
Like all my doctors. None of them work 5 days a week.
absolutely.
Yeah. So you brought up money. So let's go to money, because I think that's the topic not all owner doctors are comfortable with, and maybe even associates saying, hey, right, I'm not comfortable with, and maybe I looked on Facebook groups and they're telling me what I should get and demand what I should get. What sort of ranges and structures are you seeing across the country? Or is there a single, just one answer to solve them all?
Yeah, I'll take that first, and then I'll let Lori go deeper, because I know she did some surveys. What I see is West Coast to East Coast. On the West Coast, you can generally hire ODs for a little bit less, and as you travel to the East, the compensation tends to go up. And it's just purely a matter of, I believe, supply and demand. I'm in Southern California. We don't generally have trouble finding associate doctors. It might take a month or 2 months or 3 months, but we'll eventually find somebody. There are parts in the middle of the country that really literally cannot find associate doctors at all. And so they have to offset that by a higher compensation. And then, of course, when you get to the extreme East Coast, in the more metropolitan areas, obviously, just the cost of living is higher, greater demand, New York, Boston, all that area. So that's generally what I see. I also see a lot of shift toward eat what you kill mentality. So basing the compensation on production or collections. So basing the compensation on relative to what you're able to produce in the office.
So I did this very probably unscientific survey, but it's as much, and it actually came out pretty close to what I thought. And what I wanted to do was find out what doctors, how they were paying, but also what the total compensation was. Not total, but just the dollar compensation was on average across the country. And I broke it up into parts of the country. And what you said was true, but it wasn't as diverse as you would think. I mean, it's just it's a little, definitely a little less in like California. Definitely there's some pockets like over in New York that was a little bit high, but the majority were pretty close to each other. And I had people figure out what they were paying per hour, because as I told you, none of my doctors work 5 days a week. And so to me, that's the only way you can compare apples and oranges, right? Part-time, full-time, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, 10 hours. a day, 7 hours, I mean, that kind of thing. And it came out around $65 an hour. So there was definitely a range, but I'd say $65 to $70 an hour was really common. So I had a woman who I'd been mentoring for a while, and wherever she was one of my students, and she had sent me her contract originally. Well, they wanted to change her contract after a year, and they were going to go to some percentage based with some kind of guarantee and all this stuff. And I said, well, go back and figure out, look at the numbers, and tell me what you, with the new system, what would you be making per hour? And she was like at, I think she said 85 an hour. I was like, girl, that's a pretty good contract. Doesn't matter what the percentage is. It doesn't matter all that other stuff. If you're this, the way they're doing it's going to get you $85 an hour, that's significantly above average. So they're not trying to rip you off. So, I mean, that's because and the way it was written, it felt a little weird to me at first. That's why I told her to go back and figure it out. So I think that's a really good way for associate doctors to look at the whole situation. But it's also good for the owner docs to look at what they're offering and say, hey, if I do pay them 15% of what they kill, right? Are they making $40 an hour? Or do they have the potential to make $90 an hour? Mm-hmm. And to me, that's the bottom line.
Yeah, that is the key. So, Aaron, you mentioned certain Facebook groups that have lots of opinions, and I'll tell you, I just chuckle and I don't pay that close attention to that stuff, but I just chuckle when I do see it where there's this back and forth about you shouldn't take more or you shouldn't accept less than 18%. Listen, it all depends on how much business can be driven to you. Because if you are in a practice environment where the practice can drive you the potential to generate $1 million in revenue, and their offers 15% of collections, that's $150,000 a year. Probably not a bad wage at all, depending on where you are. But if the practice says we're going to pay you 18% of revenue, but they're only able to drive you about $500,000 in revenue, not such a good deal. So you can't get so focused on a percentage, and I see that happen all the time. The laser focused on percentages. You really ought to be asking, if you're the associate, what's my potential? How much are you going to drive to me? We pay less in my practice, but my docs also generate close to $2 million a piece in revenue. So they're highly productive, so we can afford to pay them as a percentage a little bit less.
Yeah, I think that's a big important factor on both sides, right? If you tie your identity to a number, I think you can only be disappointed, because even if your number's high today, it might be low tomorrow, right? But driving what the opportunities are, and you generate a lot because you have a setup that does that. Laurie, I know you do the same thing, and so do we, right? You've got plenty of toys to play with. You've got plenty of opportunities to engage with, and so it's there. I'm curious too, Mick, you said that you see a lot more going to Eat What You Kill. I've found that most of my associate doctors prefer security and want a set number, but I've also not found that to be a negative. I haven't found that they're not slackers, they're not working. They value security, which is probably why they're working for me and not looking to open a practice. But they like being in a private practice because they have flexibility in how they see patients and how they manage patients.
Yeah,
do you guys see that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they're looking for a guarantee, and I think that's fair because you as the employer have a responsibility and an obligation to give them opportunity. And if I were coming on as a new associate and they said, we're going to pay you, for example, 15% of collections, I would say, well, what kind of guarantee do I have that you're going to drive patients to me? So I do think it's fair for the employer to offer a fair market minimum wage. Just like a sales job where there's a guaranteed, where you're commission based, but there's a guaranteed base. I think that's fair. They need that. They deserve that because they're taking some risk by accepting that Eat What You Kill model. But also their risk is that you don't deliver the patients or the tools or the technology or the support staff. I mean, lots of things.
Is a big part.
Yeah.
And I think I used to have a different mentality than I do now. But of course, my practice is a lot bigger. But when I first went to the, Eat What You Kill method, my guarantee was pretty low. Like it was like the low end of relief work in my area. So not low, but a little low. Because my thought was, I'm giving you this potential of making so much more money that if you're not producing, I want to save a little money, right? Now, because I have the experience and the history that I know it works, like this, my system works for them. I don't do that anymore. I give them on the way top end of what relief work is in our area, maybe even a little higher as the guarantee, because I know they're going to get there anyway. They're going to get there in a month or two, and it just makes it easier to feel like the good guy, I guess is the way to put it, that they know they made a good decision, they feel good about their decision, they know they're not at risk. So I kind of switched gears on that. I could argue either way, by the way. I don't think one's right and one's wrong. I just know that it works. I've got my system down, so I'm not worried about it anymore. I'm not going to lose enough money to make a difference if it doesn't work out. And that person should leave if they can't get there.
Yep.
I mean, all my doctors do so much better than that. That if they can't get there, then I've got the wrong person in place.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think that if you as the employer are confident you're going to keep them busy, you can afford to offer them a high base because you know they're in high probability they're going to exceed that. So it just makes them feel better. There's no real risk to you as long as you are in fact going to keep them get them busier. And if you have pushback, my response is if all you're earning is base, we're not doing something right because we
Totally.
both win when you're busy.
Yep.
And so we've built an incentive structure so that we both win the busier you are. So let's figure out how to do that. If you're only just hitting these minimum uh, levels, something's wrong on my part, something's wrong on your part, or both of our parts. So we got to go back and revisit that before we do anything else.
And that makes me think about an article I wrote that about metrics. And I think before you hire an associate or before you bring on another associate, that the number one metric you should be tracking is how many dollars per clinical hour are you bringing into the practice, because that will help you. I mean, you can take that number and show them what they're going to be making, like, or what they could make. I won't say will be making, but what they could. That's the potential without even doing anything special. And you need to know that you are doing a good job producing money per clinical hour so that you can afford that associate doctor. My guess is, Mick, some of those doctors who were trading, I bet you money their dollars per clinical hour wasn't very high. And that makes a huge difference.
Yeah. I like in Chris Wolf in both the Vision Source protocol and then also in what is education through iCode, the first step is know your numbers. Right. Before you do anything, know your numbers. We've taught that. We did a whole year on metric of the month. But yeah, knowing your so when you do revenue per clinic hour, is that per OD hour? Right, for doctor hour, seeing patients, not doing administrative tasks, but
Yeah.
being a
Per
doctor.
OD patient clinical hour. Yeah.
Which I think is super important. It's also important, Mick, you talked about like the number of days. So we stopped looking at calendar days in the office and started looking at clinic days. So if I'm running 2 doctors at a time, that's 2 days. Right, 2 doctors on a Monday now is 2 clinical days, not a Monday, which counts as 1. And because then you know what your opportunities are, you know where you're at, you know all your data, and then you can backfill into it. So I'm curious, when you guys are talking about, and this is going to go back to the conversation we had before I hit record, right? When you're looking at associate, are you looking to do you find that doctors are looking to bring in a potential partner? Do you find they're looking to fill time? Do you find they're panicking, going, "Oh my God, I need somebody right now to cover," and so I'm just trying to put out today's fire, and I'll worry about tomorrow's fire later? What do you see the kind of the mentality rather of bringing on an associate? What do you think it should be?
Yeah, so I'll just give you sort of a peek into the world that I live in with Vision Source. So we have, that we know of, posted over 300 associate positions available all across the country. And I'll bet they're probably double that actually available. And this is just in the Vision Source network. So again, when we start thinking about the more rural parts of the country, there's a lot of unmet demand. There are just not enough doctors, both optometrists and ophthalmologists, to take care of patients. So some of our rural practices are extremely busy. So they're just needing doctors in the clinic to meet the unmet patient demand. I would say a smaller subset of that are practices that do have some intention of transitioning within the next 5 years. So their goal is to bring in an associate now, get them ingrained into the culture, and see if there's a pathway to ownership. So those also definitely exist within the Vision Source ecosystem. But I would say the majority of them are just trying to address unmet patient demand in their communities.
And there's also that bunch that are set at between that 800,000 and 950,000 that are just stuck and they can't grow, right? So they know they need another associate. I see that quite a bit in,
Yeah.
at least in the Austin area. But
We have some. I've worked with some practices that are booked out a year. So I know that's hard to believe, and I'm not talking about pre-appointing, because if you pre-appoint, you're theoretically booked out a year. But like literally, if you want an appointment and you call their office, you will not get an appointment until November of 2025. That's a really big problem. Not just the lost opportunity as a business, but just all the people that are not getting the care that they need, and just getting associate doctors to be willing to go into those parts of the country, is a challenge, because the new doctors that are coming out of school tend to want to practice around more metropolitan areas. And the country is now defined as 20 minutes outside of St. Louis. So it's hard to meet all that rural demand.
Well, we need more craft breweries in rural America. That makes sense. Do you find that there's so speaking of younger doctors coming out and wanting to be in a more metropolitan area, do you find that there's cultural differences that are problematic or challenging when docs are trying to find associate doctors? Is that just a lot of hogwash that we see on social media, that the young kids are dumb and lazy? Or do you find that sometimes there are some conflicts that you help offices work through?
I think culture is probably the most important thing when deciding who you're going to bring into your practice, and it's different than bringing in an optician or a technician. Of course, those cultural matches need to be there as well, but we could be a little bit more forgiving and more flexible with our general staff. But the doctors in our office really are in this weird quasi leadership position where they're sort of viewed as the boss, but they're really not the boss. Sometimes the other staff members don't treat them with respect because they say, well, you're just an employee like I am. Sometimes there's some implied leadership that the associate doctor isn't prepared to deliver. So getting that person, the right cultural fit is the most important thing to do. Sometimes it's, a city person moving to the country can create some issues, but I think just people are people, and finding the right fit for the office is probably the most important thing. I would love to hear Laurie's position on cultural fit to get all those doctors in one location.
I will tell you, it's definitely harder now than it was when it was just 3 or 4 of us, and it was all women, and they were all in the same generation. So there's definitely differences. And then my son comes in, and he's a millennial, along with actually every other doctor that I have now for me are millennials. Having Eric there to filter my thought process and what I do is good, because I still go, really? That's what they're thinking? So I think it's been really helpful. We do have a little bit of conflict that we're actually working on right now, just because we kind of have the old group and the new group a little bit, and that's not good. I mean, we're working on that.
Let me guess, Eric's job is to say, I know what she said, but here's what she meant.
Oh, Eric and my office manager, my COO, absolutely, she does it all. They both do it. Actually, Eric will do it for my my COO also. What she really meant was this. Tiffany's usually pretty good at figuring me out. Yes, I will go to Eric and I'll say something at a doctor meeting, and I'll say, do you think that hurt their feelings? He goes, I'll talk to them. But sometimes they need to hear the blunt side of it too, right? Like, they're doctors, they're professionals. I kind of feel like deal with it. He helps me, and sometimes he says yes, they needed to hear that, and so
You know,
it's good that he's there though.
you just, Laura, you just touched on something I think is also really key and important, and that is doctor meetings. So for years, I would not meet consistently with our associate doctors. Partly it was because we had some part timers, and there was just never a good day where we could all get together on the same page. Now I have just full 5 day a week full time doctors, and it's much easier for us to say, okay, guys, every Tuesday we have a lunch meeting. It has been fantastic for training, education, culture, their leadership growth. Being consistent in those meetings was really helpful. I had a call last week with an associate doctor that's trying to buy into a practice, and one of the complaints they had was that, the owner never includes me in anything. I never meet with the doctor. I have no idea what their plans are, what they want to do, and that's a real shame because they have staff meetings consistently, so they're valuing the staff and their staff time, but they're not placing value on the associate doctor and their time. And I think that's a critical piece of this as well.
Well, and I think that's in the white paper we created. We talked about that. Like, and when you first bring them on, you should be meeting with them every day. Like, you're not even talking about weekly at that point. It's every day for at least a week or so. And then meeting with them individually, along with having the group doctor meeting, if you have more than one associate doctor, of course. And I think like medical protocols. How does everybody treat a red eye?
Mhm.
I, you shouldn't have three patients walk in and be treated completely differently. That doesn't make sense to me. Or which progressive that you guys prescribe, or when do you prescribe a Neuralens, or when do you? I mean, just all those things. We need it. We're all doctors. We all have, but we need kind of what's our best plan on for everything that we do, and we all need to be kind of on the same page. Eric actually had a tough conversation with one of our docs last week, and because he said, well, I'm just going to do this, and he goes, no, we don't work that way.
No.
That's not how. This is a business first, and we have to be doing most of what we do the same way. We can't be doing things. We can't have 9 people doing things differently. It won't work.
Well, it doesn't work for patients. It doesn't work for the business. And I mean, even if you look at everything else outside of optometry, you can't have a football team all running their own plays on the field. Everybody has to be the same way. You can't have an orchestra all playing differently, right? That's where you get chaos. And ultimately, patient care suffers if we're not all singing out of the same hymnal, if we're not all playing out of the same playbook. Now, there's going to be variations, but that's where the doctoring comes in, right? If we're all
That is
aligned,
such a good analogy, Aaron. I'm so going to use that. That was brilliant.
steal
I
away.
love that. Yes.
Well, listen, it's so true because especially the more we get into specialty care, the more it's important to get everybody aligned. So let's think about one of the things that we're doing toward the end of this year, preparing for next year, is we're just cleaning up our vendors. Like we have way too many vendors that we use. So I noticed that we have 8 contact lens vendors, and I'm not talking about the big four, but I'm talking about all the gas perm, all the sclerals, all the myopia control stuff. It's like we need the team to decide what's our brand for fitting sclerals, so that everybody, all the doctors can help out one another if somebody's not available. So if one of my doctors is an expert on one type of design and the other doctor is an expert on the other, and they don't cross over, it creates confusion for the doctors. But then for the technicians, it becomes very difficult because our techs do a lot of the contact lens fitting. So getting them on the same page clinically with technology, with dry eye treatments, when you're going to use an IPL, when you're going to use the other technologies that are available. I think the more sophisticated you get away from routine eye exams, the more you have to give thought to, here's how, this is our way of doing things.
So like 90% of the time you use this scleral lens.
Yes.
10% of the time, I mean, you have that, right? It's not like you wouldn't have a second one, but everybody's go-to should be the same one. Same with CRT, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, how hard is it when a patient goes out and asks, something of your staff, what's going on here or there, and all the staff can do is talk about adult diapers, right? It depends, right? They need to be able to have answers to instill confidence in patients. Yeah, you're gonna wake up tonight thinking about that.
That's so stupid.
It's stupid, but you're gonna remember it. It's because that's what we do, and if we listen to each other, it's just there's no confidence because we don't know, and the team doesn't know, and the patients don't know, and then we complain that they don't listen to us, right? If you think about it, I mean, you can go to Walmart, you can go to Costco, you can go to anywhere, and you know exactly what you're going to get when you walk in the door, right? You know the smells, you know what the floor is going to feel like, you know what the blue vest looks like. That's why there's trust there, right? And the quality could vary, but it could be less than you want or higher than you want, but you know the trust, the expectations are met. So that's why I think it's so important to have everybody on the same page, because then it's consistent. And consistency drives trust, and it drives a better place to work. And when you don't have to worry about the little things, you can focus on the cool stuff. And you got to worry about all the little nuancy stuff. That's exhausting all day long. Yeah. Hey, Mick, you talked about, I'm going to jump around a little bit. You talked about money and trading dollars for money. And I learned the hard way, I think, until I called you and said, hey, what am I doing wrong? And you laughed at me and said, you didn't listen to me. But when I brought in an associate the first time, I didn't change my compensation because it's my name on the door and I still deserve what I'm getting paid, even though I was less in patient care. And so it quickly became a cash flow issue. I mean, we're going back, 10 plus years now. But then I realized that if I follow what you and Laurie have taught me, that I pay myself as a doctor, but then I need to pay myself as an owner. Do you find that, one, that happens too frequently, and two, that there's kind of an emotional adjustment the owner doctor has to have, especially if they're stepping back and having to adjust salaries?
Yeah, and I think that goes back to the comments we made earlier about sort of checking your ego and making sure you're doing it for the right reason. And just like any investment on a piece of technology or anything we do, if we're going to remodel or we're going to expand the office, it's important to kind of walk through a financial plan. Like what's it going to look like? How's it going to impact me? How's it going to impact the cash flow of the practice? All that kind of stuff needs to be thought through very carefully, because you can make bad decisions and it can impact your own personal income and could stress the cash flow of the practice. The great thing, I should say, about adding an associate, you need three things to add an associate. You need demand. You need patients that want to come in, right? You need a book of patients that are waiting to get in the door. They cannot wait to come in for your eye exam. You need what we call capacity, which means physical space, technology. Do I have the equipment? Do I have the staffing? Do I have all that kind of stuff? And then you need an associate. So sometimes we have patient demand and we have capacity, but we can't find the associate. Sometimes we have patient demand and we can find an associate, but we don't have enough exam rooms. So there's all kinds of pieces that need to fit in. But if you can check all those three boxes, adding an associate is, back to the way we started the conversation, the best way to break through that $1 million ceiling and scale, because you're assuming you're operating out of your same location when you bring in an associate. All of your fixed operating expenses in your practice have already been met. So every dollar that's generated by an associate doctor becomes highly profitable. What I mean by that is every dollar that comes in will have a cost of goods expense tied to it. But unless you have to hire more staff to see patients, everything else falls to the bottom line. So in a typical optometry practice, maybe 25 to 30 cents for every dollar you collect falls to the bottom line before doctor compensation. But when you add the other doctor, 70 to 75% of every dollar that comes in, or 75 cents of every dollar, falls to the bottom line. Why does that happen? Because you've already paid your rent, you've already paid your light bill, you already paid your staff, you already bought your paper clips, you already did your marketing, all that kind of stuff. So that's very, very highly profitable, but you have to have a plan to make that happen.
So one of the things that I did I've changed in the last 3 years, but that's because, again, I've scaled so much I don't have to do the same rules all the time. But I paid myself a percentage of what I brought in, the same as the other doctors, and I paid myself a small percentage of what they brought in. So that was my salary. So that really helped with that cash flow issue, right? So I did that, and then I still took distributions, but that was how I paid myself, and that was a huge help with cash flow. When I switched to doing that, which was many years ago, it made a big difference. Now I don't do that because I'm not seeing hardly any patients right now. But it made a really big difference, and I'm sure they would prefer I'd still stay percentage, but that would help with cash flow a lot.
Yeah. Well, I did something similar. I pay myself the same as I pay my other doctors, right? Whether you're an owner, associate, right? You get paid. And then I do a lot of the administrative tasks. So I wear the CFO hat, and so I check the ego, right? Because entering bills into QuickBooks and paying out of QuickBooks doesn't require the same level of certification as being a doctor does. So I pay myself significantly less for that, but I am doing work, right?
Yeah.
And then you get paid as an owner on the distributions part. But it's nice when it flows out and you can see the money there and you can see what's happening and everybody's on the same page. So very cool. What are some of the because we got to end on a couple of good stories. So what are some kind of good stories, interesting things that or situations you guys have come across that have opened your eyes or made you scratch your head or just make you laugh thinking it depends in the middle of the night?
I'll just say this. So let me just. I'll start while Laurie's thinking. I realized years ago that there were really only two things that I needed to do in my practice, and that was, if I were going to do the eye exam, I should probably be the one to actually look inside the eyeball, right? If I'm doing the eye exam, I should look inside the eye. I should also probably sign the record, right? If I'm going to do the eye exam, I should probably be the one to sign the chart. I should probably not delegate looking in the eyeball if I'm the one doing the exam and signing the chart. But literally everything else, and I mean everything else, can be delegated. And I've gotten to the point now where I've done almost that. That's a very freeing place to be, and it allows me to do other things. It allows Laurie to be in Mexico, where I think she is right now, scuba diving instead of being in her office. That's a very freeing place to be. So once I recognized that, I just started working toward, like, what can I do to get to that place where I can have the freedom to step away if I choose. Now it's within my control. So now that I've done that, this morning one of my associate doctors had to be out of the office, and so I had to pitch hit for her for a few patients this morning. And there was one patient that I saw who had seen her the last 8 years in a row, and had no clue who I was. No idea who I was.
Isn't that cool?
And I thought to myself, mission accomplished.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
Like, mission accomplished. So I've built something that doesn't have anything to do with me. It's an entity. It exists without my name needing to be attached. To me, that's when you've really built a business.
Yeah, I had a patient ask me last week. I walked in because the previous patient was seeing Dr. Hammond, and he goes, "Why is your name at the bottom of the list? Bottom of your sign?" I'm like, because you need to see these other doctors, not me, right? So I'll tell a little story, since you said kind of story. I got an email from a doctor today, I think, or yesterday, that I responded to, and she or he, can't remember, hired an associate doctor, so good clinician, said was good with patients, but was not, just didn't express the culture of the practice, this friendly, really bonding with people, that kind of a thing. And he was worried about it, and didn't think her practice would grow, and wanted my advice. And so I told him the story of one of my doctors who had a couple of complaints from patients. It was kind of the same thing was kind of happening. She didn't have the warm fuzzies that everybody else had in the office at the time. And so I met with her. So this is tip number one, coaching one-on-one and meeting, right? And talked to her about it and said, you know, she says, it takes a while for people to get to know me. I have a different kind of personality. She said, that's why I like doing scleral lenses and glaucoma and all that, because I get multiple times. I said, cool. I said, what are you struggling with the most? And she said, routine eye exams. She came from a residency and she really likes, you know, the complicated stuff. I go, well, you got to make every single person feel special. I said, so if they have nothing wrong with them, you can't say anything about them, like one eyebrow's higher than the other or whatever. You can't say anything. You say you have nothing wrong with you. I can't find anything wrong. That's so weird. Nobody else is like that because you're special, right? I'm exaggerating, trying to get her to get it. And since then, we haven't had any issues. And she's by far, I think with her direct approach, she's by far my highest producing doctor per hour and per patient. And so there's something about her that can do that. And then we've kind of gotten rid of the routine exam, but we also pushed her more into specialty care for sure. She does more specialty care, but she still has to see routine patients and she's learned how to deal with them. So I think it's not about that one particular problem. It's more about sit down and ask questions and then coach, right? Yep. I mean, I think and that's hard. They're doctors, professionals, smart. They know stuff. They know stuff I don't know.
We'll beep it out.
Yeah, they know stuff I don't know, and but I also know a lot they don't know, right? And but I think you come to it mutually together is kind of the point.
Yep.
It goes back to the theme of just open communication, and one of the things that we don't go deep into this in the white paper that Aaron referenced, but just understanding what the goals of the person that you're hiring has. Like, or do they just want to be an employed doctor, or do they want to have ownership one day? I can tell you, I encounter associates that are very frustrated because, you know, their owner has been telling them for years and years, you can buy into the practice, and they're just dragging their feet and they're making money. And I think it erodes trust. So just keeping that line of communication open is critical.
I talk to a lot of associate docs that are looking for jobs because I teach them right at school. And I'm like, you know, you need to get that owner, if you want to become an owner and they're saying they want you to become an owner, you need to get the details of that done within the first few years anyway, because otherwise it's just going to cause bad ill will and mess up the business and the practice. And that's true for both sides, right? Yep. I mean, I think that's true for the owner too. You need to get your act together and figure out what you're going to do, and don't hold this carrot out here that you're never going to get around to dealing with.
Yeah. Well, that all goes back to communication and setting expectations. And I think it's incredibly important for associate docs and owner docs to have an associate agreement. Right. I think that if you're looking to buy, or I want you to buy, like, you write that in there. You know, hey, we're going to talk about it on this date. We don't have to commit to anything, but we're going to talk to it on this date. When I graduated school, I joined my dad in practice knowing I was going to buy him out. But I didn't see a patient at all until I had an agreement in place, because I wanted to make sure that families, like, we still had Thanksgiving dinner and there wasn't going to be a fight down the line. So everybody was on the same page as to what was going to happen. And at the time, they probably thought I was crazy. And I am, but I wanted to make sure that everybody was on the same page and expectations.
That's
the other
great.
thing I found, and I found this personal, is that it sounds really good. Hey, I'm going to mentor them. I want to be a leader. But if you've never mentored another professional, it's kind of tough. And so I initially, it's turned into something really cool with the book club, but I initially hid behind books. And so I could make the book the bad guy, right? We'll read the book together and we'll talk about it. And I can give my insights, you can give your insights, but the book can be the bad guy if they say you have to do X, Y, and Z. So if you're not sure how to have that mentoring conversation, I found that's a really good place to start. Let's just read something together, go through a course together and learn together, and then we can talk as peers as opposed to me trying to mentor you or tell you what to do.
It's a cool idea. Mm-hmm.
Oh. Yeah. And there's a lot of good information in books. A lot of crazy stuff too.
Not that Mick or I read very many business books at all.
None. No. So
I'm reading one right now.
What are you reading right now?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask me that. It was something about hard things are hard, I think is what it was. Have you heard about that one?
No, but it seems really insightful.
I know. I like the way this guy is writing, so I'm really enjoying him. I just started it. He's telling his whole story, and he's about to go bankrupt during the dot-com bust and everything.
Ooh.
So we'll see how that all plays out over time. But he's definitely telling it as a story,
That's
which
cool.
makes it super readable.
Yeah, that makes it nice. Yeah, it's exciting. We're actually doing I haven't announced it yet, so this will be the first time probably, but the book club with Kyle Clutie and Brianna Rue monthly on here next month. It's just, there's so many good books and so many good discussions to have that we're going to hit it hard.
Cool.
But thank you guys very much for making time to come on. Thank you even more for your friendship and your mentorship to me personally and to our colleagues in the profession. I really think that private practice is the best place to give and get care. Right? It's how we build those relationships, and thank you guys for your support in that. I will link to the white paper we referenced in the show notes, your contact information as well. If anybody has any questions, want to get a hold of you.
Thank you, Aaron. Do you mind if I throw a quick plug in?
Please do.
VisionSourceNext.com. We have so many job opportunities if there are young ODs or ODs looking for work. A great resource. We've also just launched our new Associate OD Placement Program where young doctors can join Vision Source practices and get up to $150,000 of their student loan repaid. So great opportunity there as well.
Nice. Oh, I can't top $150,000 right now. That's a good one to end on.
That's a good one.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys, and look forward to next time we're all together.
Okay.
Thank you, Aaron.
Hey, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and our YouTube channel, both linked in the show notes. Now, here's something exciting. We're giving away a 1-year subscription to Comprehensive Optometry Simplified. All you have to do is leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, take a screenshot, and email it to me at questions@icodeeducation.com. We'll put that in the show notes as well. We'll be selecting a winner on December 15th, so don't miss your chance to get access to this valuable resource. Thanks again for listening. I can't wait to see your reviews.